Today is the first episode in the Agents of Belonging mini-series for this season, and in that spirit, I'm curious. Do you ever feel lonely because you're interested in wide-ranging topics and conversations that the people you're around just don't relate to? If you're looking for valuable life stories with practical mental health insights, I'm recommending the podcast Discover More. The host, Benoit Kim, is a policymaker turned psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist, and in his show, he highlights this magical relationship between healing and the best human experience. Look for Discover More wherever you listen to podcasts or watch it on YouTube. Do you want to change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. This week, I'm starting a new mini-series on Art Heals All Wounds called Agents of Belonging. The artists in this series do work that is about inclusion, expansion, and dissolving. Dissolving the barriers that divide and define us as those who belong and those who are other. Way back when I was in college, I was a semiotics major. If anyone listening is from my era, you may have heard of semiotics. It's basically applying different types of analysis to media and then using lots of really challenging vocabulary that, quite honestly, sounded like a foreign language to me sometimes. I loved being a semiotics major because we spent a lot of time watching films. But there was one term that kept coming up quite a bit: the other. I kept thinking to myself, what are they even talking about? And then it gradually dawned on me, hey, they are using that term to talk about women in these films we're watching. So does that mean that I'm the other? And if I am the other, what am I even doing here talking about people who look like me as the other? What I didn't realize was that I also had a whole list of people that I might see as the other. Each of us in our various communities otherize other people all the time. Otherizing is about fear and about who has or is perceived to have power. It's how we as humans determine who is us and who is them. How's that working out for us? I've got several artists lined up for this mini-series whose work not only focuses on inclusion, but uses collaboration and art forms that chip away at these socially constructed walls that divide us from, well, others. My first guests are filmmakers Shweta Ghosh and Priyanka to talk about their work together on the documentary We Make Film. We Make Film was Shweta's research project for her PhD. Initially conceived as a series of workshops, it became a feature documentary film. Shweta was interested in questioning ableism and understanding ways to expand the filmmaking industry of India to include more filmmakers with disabilities. In the meantime, Priyanka, who is herself a filmmaker with a locomotor disability, had spent a lot of time analyzing the portrayal of people with disabilities in mainstream media and how those portrayals led to harmful stereotypes. Acquaintances from their time at university, Shweta reached out to ask Priyanka if she would like to be either in a workshop or part of the crew for the film. Priyanka immediately chose to be part of the crew. The deep and layered collaboration between crew members, between crew and subject participants, was the result of a process of openness, laying aside assumptions, and lots of conversation, all of which led to trust between all of the participants. The result of that trust was the creation of a space for free, creative expression. Thank you for joining me in the Agents of Belonging mini-series on Art Heals All Wounds. If you like what you're hearing, please follow us on your favorite listening app. If you know of anyone who you think would enjoy hearing from these artists as well, please share the show. Priyanka Pal is a filmmaker in Mumbai, India, as well as a youth coordinator for the Asia South Pacific Association for Basic and Adult Education. Priyanka has also worked on projects that address the wide range of disabilities that can hinder access to various forms of media. Having this background and experience really helped Priyanka approach the project of We Make Film with no assumptions. She knew that there were a wide range of experiences of disability that differed from hers. Shweta Ghosh is a lecturer and documentary filmmaker based at the University of Reading in the UK. She teaches both film theory and practice. Some of Shweta's courses cover disability in the media, and documentary filmmaking. Shweta herself does not identify as someone with a disability. However, her father does have one, and she grew up collaborating with him and other family members in making images. I'm really thrilled that I was able to have this conversation with both Shweta and Priyanka at the same time. It was very early in the morning for me in California, about dinner time for Shweta in Reading, and then late at night for Priyanka in Mumbai. Hi, Shweta and Priyanka. Thank you so much for joining me on Art Heals All Wounds. Can you start by telling us who you are and what you do? Maybe, Shweta, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us on the podcast. I'm really excited to speak today. So, I'm a lecturer and a documentary filmmaker. I'm based at the University of Reading, in the UK. And yeah, I've been here since I started doing my PhD in 2016, and I was in India before that.
Okay. And Priyanka?
Yeah, hi, Sam. It's such a great to be here with you guys and have this conversation today. I'm actually a filmmaker with disability, but also I've been working with an organization called ASBE as a youth coordinator. And yeah, I've been working in Asia Pacific region. So really excited to be here with you guys to have the conversation.
Okay, so I am familiar with both of you because, Shweta, you made a film called We Make Film, and Priyanka, you were definitely in that film, and maybe also you were like the crew within the film. It was very meta. It was a film sort of following the two of you as filmmakers. Can you describe what this project is, this documentary film? And Shweta, it's your film, but I would like to hear from both of you. So maybe, Shweta, you go first.
Mm-hmm. So, We Make Film sort of started as a PhD project in 2015 as a proposal, but the seed was sown when I was making my film Access, which is my debut documentary. When I was working on that film, I collaborated with two of the protagonists who basically, one of them was an illustrator and she made the illustrated panels for the film. And another protagonist was basically the person who wrote the poem that was included at the end of the film. And we talk diversity, inclusion in the industries and whatnot, but when you actually sort of work and collaborate and enjoy working with each other, and then you look for that experience again, you find that you don't have as many people on your industry databases and you don't have as many people within those networks. So that's what I started doing for the next projects. I was interested in having more disabled filmmakers, having more filmmakers from other identities as well in my crew, and I realized just how difficult it was to find disabled filmmakers in practice. So that sort of sowed the seed of We Make Film, and then I kept thinking about it and engaging with that question as we went along. I went along making other films, and then in 2015 I basically was interested in starting a practice-based PhD project. So that basically means that filmmaking is your way of asking and answering questions in the research process, and that's when the idea sort of developed further into a whole sort of project. I think the documentary wasn't necessarily supposed to be a documentary, but that's how it developed, and that's also what my specialism is. So it made sense for me to do that. But actually, at that stage, initial stage, it was going to be. It could have been a video installation. It could have been a series of short documentaries, but it turned into a feature because that's the form it needed to take alongside the thesis.
Yeah, and Priyanka, as you were joining with Shweta to make this project, Shweta, you referred to this idea of a question and asking questions and answering questions. So Priyanka, what did you understand the question to be with this project?
Before I spoke to Shweta about We Make Film, I was working with an organization in one of a city in India, Bangalore, and my work with them was basically to create accessible media products. So it can be, of course, the brochures, flyers, booklets, online booklets, ebooks, etc. Even the website. So we were working on creating e-courses which are accessible. And then the founder of the organization challenged me into making me focus on creating videos which are accessible. And it took me quite some time to understand it and understand the process of it. But when we started getting into it more and more, we realized that it was not just about creating videos which are accessible for persons with disability, but it was also accessible, for other people who don't identify themselves as disabled people, but they still, it helped them to understand the content more clearly. So, for example, the subtitles and adding audio description, all these things automatically helped people to get more and more inclined towards it. And that really created a lot of change in perspective for me as a filmmaker. And it was really a great moment for me. I was really very excited about it. But at the same time, I was also understanding the nuances, because as a person with disability, I could understand certain things about what a person with physical disability feels, when we talk about our experiences. But when I'm interviewing a person who's deaf or who is visually impaired, their experiences are quite different than what I have. So for me, even if I'm making a film, if I'm writing a story, it has a different perspective, right? And that goes for different people as well. And I was just wondering, how can we make films where the person with disability can bring their experiences as well into the story, into their process of production, and how that will impact the filmmaking process, how will that impact the film, the content of it. And I was just questioning all those things. And it was a very different aspect. I could discover a lot of different aspects towards it. And the question kept coming up again and again in my mind. And luckily I had the chance, to get working with Shweta, which was very much focused on what I was, questioning again and again. And that really excited me. And I was like, okay, yeah, it will be great to get into it, to understand the film making process from a different perspective. And yeah, that's how I get caught into filmmaking project.
It's so interesting that you bring up something I was going to ask a little bit later, but there are sections in the film, and maybe Shweta, you can talk about this, where you do show filmmakers with many different types of disabilities. And I really enjoyed and appreciated that, because you could see both why someone who, for example, was blind would want to make videos, and you could see ways that other people were using film to express themselves. So can you talk a little bit about some of the different people who were interested in creating films that you engaged with in this film?
Mm-hmm. one of the things that you need to do, again, because I came at this from a research project point of view first, is that you need to define your scope. And when you're defining your scope, you can't talk about everything, even if you want to. But that wasn't possible. And so I sort of realized that even within the disability community, obviously it's not a monolithic community. So, there are varying levels of access, varying levels of experience, and invariably there are some disabilities that still get foregrounded or, have more access than the others. So, invariably you will find that when it comes to media making processes, people with those disabilities tend to be further ahead, even if they are also facing specific barriers and challenges. So I realized that there were mostly people with locomotor disabilities or physical disabilities and sensory disabilities. So, like people who either the deaf community or people who were blind and partially sighted. And I was finding people more readily already practicing or having had some training. So that's the reason that I decided to then focus the project a little bit more in that direction, as opposed to sort of looking at, say, neurodiversity or learning disability and, other categories in that sense. But I still met a lot of people in that initial stage before, when you're still looking at who you might work with, because the way the film was made was basically undertaking what I call interview workshops. So they're a way in which you work together and work on a short film together, and then that process of working on the short film results in some elements coming up and some questions coming up, which you answer as you develop that script together. So in a way, it's the creative process that triggers those conversations. And I was interested in seeing who was keen on doing those workshops with me. So I realized that many people met me, but not everyone was interested in doing the workshops. So ultimately, the people who are in the film, who are the lovely people, Mijo Jose, Anuja Sankhe, and Debopriya Ghosh, as well as a team of sort of filmmakers as well as theatre makers called RH Films, they call themselves. These are the four sort of people or groups that we did the workshops with. And in fact, I had approached Priyanka because we were talking about similar things or thinking about similar things. I had, when I met Priyanka at that initial stage, I had asked her if she wanted to be in the crew or a participant, and she was like, nope, crew. And it was already clear to me that she would be a great collaborator in this research, as would be the other crew member that I had, whose name is Sumit Singh. And we were doing collaboration at two levels. So we were doing collaboration within the crew as research associates and filmmaker crew, crew members. And then we were also collaborating with our research participants or our workshop participants. And we managed to cover a lot of ground, because it's not like we did the workshops with a person with physical disability, but because Priyanka was on the team, that helped, have some very interesting conversations and brought up some very interesting dynamics within the community and how people engage with each other and define themselves as well.
Well, I want to ask both of you, but I'll start with you, Priyanka. How did you see this project change due to interaction with the participants? Always in a documentary film, and I suppose in a research project as well, you go in with an idea, but you have to be open to what happens when you put that idea into practice and how it gets changed by the participation of others. So, Priyanka, I'm wondering, are there any key things that you remember from making this film and where you came out saying, oh, I'm surprised that didn't go the way I thought it would, or something like that?
Actually, it was overall the whole experience, as well as the whole film kind of went into a way where I personally didn't expected it to be. And sometimes it was really a very eye opener kind of a scenario. So there was this one time I remember when we were working with Mijo. He's one of the partner where he was also into filmmaking, and he had made a lot of films, and he has also got awards for his short films in the Deaf Festival, Deaf Filmmaking Festival. Shweta, can you just add which festival was it?
Yeah, India International Deaf Film Festival. That's the one. Yeah.
India International Film Festival. So Deaf Film Festival. Okay. He actually received a lot of awards for that. And I was very excited to meet him, to understand his ideas and his thought process into the filmmaking. And we had a certified sign language interpreter with us to help us have a smooth conversation with Mijo. But when we went there, we realized because Mijo is from one of a city which is very remote, and he didn't had a formal sign language learning from his school or any of the institute. So he has developed. In fact, the community itself in that space had developed their own sign language, which was very different than what the formal language is. So even the sign language interpreter had a lot of challenges, and he was asking Mijo to understand, and asking a lot of questions to Mijo to get a clear understanding of what he was seeing, what ideas he had. And there was this one point where he shared about one of the Bollywood main feature film. It's called Bahubali, and he was just explaining, the how the production, like the behind the scenes video, and he was so fascinated with it, and he kept on going about, oh, the camera went from here till there, and like the expression, his way of talking, it was so animated and it was so much energetic, and the interpreter was trying to bring that energy, but it was not coming in as much in detail as I think Nijo was trying to communicate. So after we had that one particular shot, I just went up to our interpreter saying that, okay, if it's possible, can you just explain the details as well? Because that is what we want. That is what we want from him, to understand how he looks at the films and what is his way of, looking at the production process. And then the interpreter got the whole vibe, and he's then inclined towards that, asking those questions and asking more details from him. That really helped us to get a clear understanding of his experiences as filmmaker. Same goes with the other participants also, because we actually didn't go with the specific plan of, okay, you need to make a 2 minute short film or a 5 minute short film. We just gave them an open space of what they would like to convey, how they would like to go. And it was really interesting of how they were able to pitch in, talk about their experiences, how they viewed the filmmaking process itself, and what their idea was of creating films. So yeah, it was a lot of really great surprises, and we were really excited about it to come across. And also, I remember one of our team member, who was also the main person who was doing helping us as in production. Sumit had discovered that sign language can be so accessible when it comes to even talking to your crew when you're shooting, and it really helps in the process. So that was his experience, which I was like really amazed. I was like, yeah, you're right, this is how it will be really helpful as a crew. So yeah, a lot of things came across, and a lot of things surprised us. It was a great experience for us.
Mm. And what about you, Shweta? Is there a time or two that stands out for you?
Oh, yes. So, the one thing that one realizes when, the documentary process combined with a semi structured research process is a cocktail for anxiety and uncertainty to some extent. But when you have a crew that is sort of very much on the same page and is constantly sort of communicating, I think you're in a position to make it work to your advantage. So I think there were a lot of moments that I certainly didn't expect. Like, for example, I had a design for the workshops, like quite a clear one, that, okay, in the first day, we will look at some of the work that you've made and talk about what your process was. Then, on the second and the third day, we will start working on that short film script or synopsis that you want to develop. And then in the last couple of days, we will wrap up and, have some more reflecting on the process and what has this meant to you? Where might you take this? And things like that. Having a structure is one thing, but how people make it their own is another. So even though I had this in mind, some of it was turned completely on its head. Like when it came to the prompt itself, there were some people who wanted to talk about the fact that they want to make films and it's not accessible for this and this reason, and how do we make it work. Some people wanted to talk about the being discriminated against, but some people like Debupriya wanted to talk about the experience of education through an animated film. So it was very much about the experience of being a deaf child in school, but the film itself was not about being a disabled filmmaker, or one's experience as a disabled filmmaker. But what came up was that there were aesthetic choices that she was making, or there were specific ways in which she very clearly wanted to convey that story as a deaf filmmaker, that, then tell you that it doesn't have to be the topic every time. It can inform perspectives, it can inform practices, as long as you have, a disabled filmmaker on board. So, there's that common assumption sometimes that disabled people will make stories on disability, but it can be much more than that. It is much more about how ableist current processes tend to be, and how there is always a way of reimagining it when you have a disabled filmmaker on board. So that was one of those very exciting moments for me, because I felt like it helped me shed my own assumptions of what people would be working on. And the other was, again, in the workshop with Mijo, for example, the first 2 days went great. We looked at the material, and because he had worked so much already and won so many awards, he had lots to talk about. But when it started coming to the actual short film work, we realized that it wasn't quite working out the way we were looking at it. So it's in the film as well, where Mijo then started filming us and filming the process and becoming a part of the documentary crew itself. And that taught us a lot more about, like Priyanka mentioned, Sumit identifying that a lot of sign language as well as gestures can be used within filmmaking processes, or a TV floor, for example, where you can use it, can be universally accessible as a process if you were to use signs instead of other gestures and things. So we began to have more realizations and reflections on how processes could be accessible, even though the film content that Mijo developed wasn't necessarily about being a disabled filmmaker or being a disabled person even. So I think these were they were lovely, but they were very stressful at the time, but they were lovely when you think about it now, because that's what tells you, when you're looking at a participatory process, or you're looking at a process where you're actively inviting people to critique you or question you, it is, then your job to sit back and let people say that, because that's what you ask them to do. But it can be a difficult thing to negotiate, because you always go in with certain ideas and you come back with something else.
Right. It sounds like these experiences in a certain way really challenge the hierarchy, which can be inherent in any type of media making, but especially in the filmmaking process. And you were also dealing, all of you, with people who were used to being the quote unquote behind the camera producers, directors. And it's really interesting to see how it almost sounds like you're describing something that's becoming a little bit more democratic in terms of how this particular section is going to be made.
Yeah, I think that was the idea, as much as possible, to make it as democratic and inform the entire process with participatory techniques. Because so Sumit has done a lot of participatory video work in several parts of India, and community radio as well as community video work. And Priyanka is currently working on participatory action research, was it, but also in general has worked widely with the disability community. And I've had an interest in all of this, but I don't think we quite thought it would come together so well, but it was useful for us to have this thing. We had a sort of crew orientation before, because Sumit had mentioned he hadn't worked with a disabled filmmaker before. I have personal experience with disability in the family, but I don't identify as disabled myself. So there were a lot of assumptions that I could have made, which I didn't want to. So it was important to have this sort of orientation at the beginning, where Priyanka, Sumit and I just sat and talked about what each one of us needed from the process, what each one of us was expecting, what are the ways in which we could make it accessible. And Priyanka was our sort of film accessibility specialist. So there were things that she mentioned, not just in terms of her requirements, but what we needed to keep in mind to make the film as accessible as possible in the production stage, so that you can make it more accessible as a product at the end. So there were a lot of, I think the basis of the entire process was conversations. Even the debrief at the end of each day that we had helped us continue to agree, disagree, talk about what are the various ways in which we've understood that day, and why we're comfortable or not comfortable with certain things that happened that day. And that helped us to bring our own bits to each workshop, but also keep each other in check to some extent, where you can't just fly away with your own sweet little ideas. You are constantly in communication with each other and trying to check in on each other about whether they're okay and whether they're on board. So yeah, I think at the basis, the basis of it all was very much open communication and making it as democratic as possible across not just the crew, but also crew and participants.
Mm. And Shweta, you mentioned the disability that you have in your own family. And I have to say, those are some of the most beautiful scenes in the film with you and your father. Can you talk a little bit about your father's disability and just how that has shaped your perspective and drawn you to interest in this accessibility in making media?
Oh, yeah. So my father was, I think he acquired his disability at the age of 8, where he was playing football and the ball went and got stuck in a transformer, open transformer, and he was very young. He went to take it out and his arms got burnt, so he had to be amputated. So he's been disabled ever since I've known him, obviously. And my mum met him in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, so it's a lovely little place for our family in that sense. But I have to say, I don't think I was thinking about. We've been making images with my dad, my sister, my mom, and I have been making images with my dad for a very long time. But I hadn't quite thought critically about it till I actually started the research project. So it worked backwards. And in a way, it's a revisitation of those moments through the film that I do, because we've been doing this for a very long time, but thinking about whether you're doing it collaboratively enough, whether you're doing it in a way that allows that person who you are making images with, are you doing justice to their creative concepts and ideas and expression? Those were questions that I started thinking about much later. So I do agree that the bits with my dad are some of the sections which actually help me reflect on myself and what my role has been in adding to the ableist environment, even if it's a small bit. And I think that is why those sections exist in the film. And it was very interesting to revisit the same creative processes we've been doing for so long, but this time much more aware of positionality, much more aware of, yes, father, daughter, but daughter is a filmmaker, father is the father of a, filmmaker. So how do these different things interact?
Right. And Priyanka, you've both spoken about this a little bit, but I'm wondering for you, going into this process, it sounds like you already had a lot of experience in thinking about accessibility for people with different kinds of disabilities. But did you find in this process of making this film ways of looking at things that you were not aware of, even though you had done this work in the past?
Like, one thing was very clear from my experience was to never assume any person's abilities or their challenges. So I really learned the approach of asking the person, asking what would help them, what are the ways we can make the place, the process, even our work accessible. And from that I actually got a lot of learnings. Also, it opened a lot of new world and new ways of making the process as well as the space accessible and inclusive. So that experience actually helped me in while we were working in We Make Film, because I was very clear about not having any assumptions before visiting the person, before talking to that person. And I remember when we were having this orientation of our team. So me, Shweta, and Sumit, we had this long conversation where we stayed in one place and we talked about our experiences. And when Sumit shared about the participatory approach of the documentary filmmaking, Shweta shared about her experience of how she's looking at the disability aspect, because she had experiences in her family, with her father, and also as a PhD scholar, what her idea was. And for me, it was more on the terms of how we can make the process inclusive, accessible, and also from the experiences I had with different types of persons with disability, even with people who have autism or has a learning disability. So what are the ways, if in case we have to come across them, or if there is a conversation which leads us towards them, so how we can work around it. And that itself kind of opened a lot of doors within the crew, and we were quite comfortable sharing our assumptions as well, and our challenges as well. And because I have a locomotor disability, I was okay to share that there are certain challenges with where I won't be able to lift the camera with the tripod and go from one place to another. So I will need Shweta's and Sumit's help there. And likewise, there were more things which we shared, and I shared from my perspective where I would need help and what are the ways I would require their support in the process. And because we were all three also very open to it as a crew, so it really built up a safe space for us, which kind of reflected when we were doing the workshops with our participants, because they could see, also sense the comfort we were all three, and that really helped. And I remember when we were working with Debupriya in Kolkata, and like by second day, I think she felt like she was sitting with a group of friends. She also shared that, I don't feel like I'm working. It feels like so much fun to be with you guys. And I was personally very glad, because I was like, okay, finally, there is a space where she can be on her own and doesn't feel like, there are cameras on or there is sound equipment around. So sometimes it really uh, creates a barrier, for expression, and we really didn't wanted that. So that really helped us as a helped me personally to know that okay, we have overcome that barrier. Also same with the other participants also. And one thing which I really find very interesting is that none of the participants ever felt that they needed to prove something. And it was something which I really was very amazed at, because from my experience of meeting different people with disability in India, there are so many challenges with regard to the space, the infrastructure, that perception kind of comes again and again, of proving the other person that you are capable of certain things. And that kind of creates a new space. They take it up as a challenge, and it really obstructs the expression, it obstructs the communication in certain way. But I couldn't sense that with any of our participants. So it was really an amazing experience. And I remember when we were working with Mijo, there was when he was actually interviewing Shweta and asking her all the questions about the cost aspect of the inclusion, including a person with disabilities. What is the process? How you budget it? And it was really interesting to see him actually thinking about the inclusion process, and actually asking her the real questions about, okay, you talk about inclusion, you talk about making sure that everyone gets that opportunity, but what about the budget? What are the things we need to keep in mind when we are creating a project? Because it can't be just on the theory aspect, it needs to be very practical. And it was really an amazing experience for me to experience that Mijo questioning Shweta, and asking her so many questions about it.
Yeah, I remember that section very well. So, my one final question that I have for both of you is, having done this project and having worked with people with such a diversity of disability, do you have some sort of vision, not just of how crews could be accessible, but what kind of media and stories could be created if that accessibility existed? Shweta, do you have an idea?
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm hoping to continue working on this all my life, because I don't think many lifetimes of many people is going to be enough to make things as accessible as we want them to, or as inclusive as we want them to. But I hope to continue doing this. So I have a couple of strategic ways in which I'm planning to approach this. I think one of the things that really came up during the entire filmmaking process and the entire project is that there is already a lot of work going on. Disabled people are making films within the context that they're in. So if you're in the UK and the US and accessibility looks much more advanced here, you might, be making films and you've already advanced into how do I do this in Hollywood and such. But in India, it's still not necessarily as prevalent within the industry, for example. And accessibility, we're still looking at basic public transport and, hotels for a crew and whatnot still being accessible. So the conversation looks slightly different in these countries. But the one thing that came out was that people are still making films. If you have access to a camera and if you find that process accessible, you are going to tell your story. So I think one of the things that I have realized is that it's just about making connections. At least that's the role that I want to play. It's about connecting up people to resources, to ideas, which all are very much trying to find each other. So, at least for me, it's not about me thinking about what I could do differently, but it's about facilitating those connections and networks. And I'm trying to do this right now. I think there are a couple of ways in which one can do it in short and long term ways. But filmmaking will look different as a process the more diverse people you have within film crews, because each one will bring their own experience. And if you really give that space to breathe, each person will bring their own experience, their own practices, especially in the context of, like we spoke about, sign language informing, potential communication on a TV floor, which needs to be silent. It could very easily inform production processes if we wanted them to. Similarly, if we're looking at forms of expression, I think one of the interesting things that came up in Debopriya's workshop was that how she had characterized the deaf girl and the other characters was that because she was a lip reader, the people who took time to communicate with her had full features, but the people who didn't only had mouths, because that's what she focused on. And that kind of representation is something we haven't seen in an animated film or in any other expression so far. So the minute we have more disabled talent come through and disabled crew people come through, things are going to start looking more interesting, more well-rounded, because right now the representation is so flat and the kinds of practices are so embedded in having quote unquote fully functional bodies that people aren't quite thinking about what it could look like. And we want to work in that direction. So I'm hoping that I can start off with engaging the more academic spaces, because that's where I work right now. So, how do we make future generations of filmmakers and media makers think about these questions? But I'm also hoping that we can continue working with industry, with policymakers. It'll take its own sweet time, I think, given the pace at which all of these things happen. But I find that I'm going to start working already on the things that I'm interested in the academic spaces. So whether it's through another research project or it's through the way I teach my students about accessible filmmaking. I know Priyanka and Sumit have already come and spoken about their experiences on this filmmaking process, but also more generally about accessible filmmaking and participatory methods in my class. So, there are ways in which I'm hoping to continue this. But I think it is something that it's just a matter of time. The more people we have, the more we will see expression and practice, widen and broaden and open up, really.
And Priyanka, how would you answer this question? How would the content of films and media change as things become more accessible?
During my master's, I was also doing the dissertation on portrayals of persons with disability in mainstream cinema. There were a lot of stereotypes which I had come across, and also during the focus group discussions we had, a lot of the people with disabilities shared that how these stereotypes kind of creates a hurdle, creates additional barriers for them to access the society, as well as to have just being a human, and not just like being just into that bracket of person with disability. So I feel if the persons, if different types of disabled people, they come into the process of being the filmmakers, it itself will create a space which is more inclusive, which will also enhance the understanding of disabilities for the other people who are working around it, and hopefully that can add on to uh, decreasing the stereotypes which has been going on. It won't I won't say that it will be a foolproof plan and that is how it would be, but it can somehow, to a certain extent, help the filmmakers understand the perspective and to have a space where a disabled crew member can share the experience of what are the how that would be perceived by the community itself. So that should help in creating a more inclusive space for people, especially when it comes to the mainstream cinema in India. And within my work of space, because I've been also working more with youth, I come to understand that when it comes to youth, because there are so many gaps in understanding disability, especially in education system, so most of them are relying on the films or the series which are talking about different disabilities. So that is, for them, it is the point of reference, to understand the disability. So automatically the stereotypes which are shown in that particular product is what is assumed as reality, and that kind of creates more and more gaps between the person or the colleague with disability and with non-disabled. So I've well, one of my youth member had shared that he had a fear of having conversation with person with disability because he was scared that he might offend or say something or ask something which would be not very comfortable for the person, and that kind of created a lot of hurdles, and he made sure that he kept a distance, which was again problematic because he was not being very inclusive about it. So he shared that because I've been working with him and we have been talking about the media aspect and the portrayals of persons with disability in different media products, he understood the reality of it. He understood the core of understanding a person as a person before making assumptions of their disability and making that disability a part of the personality. So I hope with the work we are doing, it would create much more safe space for even non-disabled people to talk about disability and to, make it more open and not something which is like a hush hush topic. So that is where I feel it would be a great place. And I'm looking forward to working with Shweta again on this and, curating or developing more nuanced space for other filmmakers with disability so that they could also share the space, create more content, and yeah, support them in whatever way I can. So it will be a great pleasure.
Well, can you both share where people can find out more about you? If it's a website, if it's social media. Shweta, where can people find more about you and your work?
So we have social media pages. If you look up We Make Film India on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, you will find it. We're the only ones called We Make Film India. My work is on shwetaghosh.com, and that is going to have a lot of updates on, what we've been doing since the release of the film in 2021, as well as, how we have been doing various events and putting together a WhatsApp group of filmmakers with disabilities in India at the moment, which is going to then develop hopefully into a website that can host opportunities, connect people, and find ways in which we can engage industry and academia. So that's where you can find me. Also, you can find me as Shweta Ghosh 88 on most of these three platforms as well. So yeah.
Okay, and what about you, Priyanka?
So for me, I don't have a specific website to have all my work together because I've been also working with different organizations and also mainly with the communities. So I can share the links, but I'm very much active on Instagram, on Facebook, and I've been having a lot of conversation on emails also. So I would be happy to share the details so that anyone who would want to contact or have even like a small conversation about it, it would be great.
Okay, that's wonderful. And I will put all of that contact information in the show notes so that people can find you. And I just want to thank you both for coming on the show to talk about this. It was very, very generous of you, Priyanka, because it's quite late there in India. And thank you, Shweta, for helping to arrange all of this for the three of us. And thank you both for this incredible film. It was such a great experience to see this and to think about things differently.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And Priyanka and I know we can't stop talking about it. So thank you for giving us a space to share a little bit about it. And the film will hopefully be available soon by the end of this year as well. So I will keep you posted on that.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm so grateful to Shweta and Priyanka for making time for this conversation to happen. I hope that you'll follow both of them to see more of their work. I'll put all of their info in the show notes. If you teach, hosting a screening of We Make Film and inviting Shweta and Priyanka to guest over Zoom would be amazing. In fact, I think they've done that a few times already. One thing I love is to really reflect on the title of this documentary, We Make Film. When I first heard about this film, I thought the we in the title referred to we, a community of filmmakers with disabilities. But after seeing the film and talking to Shweta and Priyanka, I realized just how much more expansive the we in the title really was. That we could include you, me, us, them, working together. I'm so glad you listened to this episode today. Let me know what you thought. You can reach me through my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. As always, this show was recorded using Squadcast FM. Art Heals All Wounds comes to you from Oakland, California, on unceded territory of the Choqueño Ohlone people.